This is Our View, brought to you by the people who work for you, the proud members of the Washington Federation of State Employees. As the U.S. and the industrialized world dig themselves out of several years of economic depression, you have to ask if anyone has learned a lesson from all this. And how do we keep this from happening again? An answer from John Evans of the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD Treaty Nations.
I think the first thing is to win the arguments that the enormous part of growth and growth in incomes, which has been really looted by the top 1% in countries such as the United States, has got major economic as well as social and political consequences which can't go on. I mean, the OECD report, which came out just before this ministerial council, showed that over the past 25 years in the United States, the top 1% share of total income increased from 8% to over 20%. If you look at 30 years, if you deduct the 1% from the figures of incomes growth each year, then the average growth in incomes falls from about 1% a year to 0.6% a year. So basically, the top 1% have been creaming off about half of all the income growth for 30 years. Now that can't continue. I think it's creating major distortions in the economy. It's stopping intergenerational mobility, it's distorting the education system, it's distorting the consumption system, and it's slowing growth. Now I think we're beginning to win the argument that that is bad for growth. What we now need to do is to get policy recommendations aligned with actually tackling the problems of income inequality. Not just for the bottom of the workers, that's important, but also for that top 1%. So essentially we need to strengthen unions, which I think is one conclusion that helps all along the line on reducing income inequality. The OECD figures show that when unionization rates are higher, inequality is lower. When you have unions holding CEOs accountable for their pay, then it actually has a dampening pressure on that. When you get unions doing collective bargaining, it's able to raise median wages, median incomes. When you have unions also arguing in favor of strong minimum wage floors through negotiations or through legislation, that helps to set a floor in the labour market. So I think unions are part of the key solution to this, in addition to winning the arguments.
French workers, when faced with an erosion of their rights, are not reluctant to show their displeasure and take direct action. And while they generally get the public support, there are those who feel the discomfort. But you have to say that everyone gets the message.
For the last 3 weeks, the SNCF, the French National Railroad Company, has been on strike. The reason is mainly because of the new reforms that will be taking place soon by the Minister of Transportation. With over 44 billion euros in debt, the French National Railroad Service may be partly privatized for economical reasons.
Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour. Aujourd'hui, vendredi 13 juin, un mouvement social perturbe fortement les circulations à destination de la Normandie pour les trains intercités et TER. Toutes les prévisions sont montrées sur les affiches en gare ou le site sncf.com.
And with over 52% of their workers being part of this union, the strike is affecting people who depend on trains every day. From everyday users to tourists on vacation, everyone was suffering from this. But some people feel as if they were taken hostage by the situation. Even if many feel concerned by this strike, many people are also misinformed.
Anytime that there's a union, an organized union that strikes, you feel that you're being a hostage, but that's what they intend to do. So they fulfill what they need to do, and as unfortunate as it affects people like us, it's what they feel they need to do. I don't agree with it, but it's what they need to do. I get a little tired of the unions thinking they can bully people around.
1 out of 3 trains were running on a national level in France, making it very hard for travelers to get around.
Oui,
There was already a strike a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, this happens quite often. Most of the workers on strike were conductors. But the misunderstanding of these strikes makes it very difficult for people to support and maintain some solidarities with workers. The SNCF claims that no changes will be made for railroad employees. But by privatizing part of the service, outsourcing of personnel may be at hand. Now only Italian and Swedish railroad workers are allowed to circulate on French lines. But with all these changes, other European Union workers may be using French lines. Benjamin Marcus for Our View, Paris, France.
A new film on the history of the U.S. labor movement will soon be available. It's called Brothers on the Line, and it describes the working conditions and the struggle of our workers in the early auto industry.
Good evening. Tonight, from Detroit, we go after the story of conflict between big business and big labor, a struggle that promises to shape the future of our entire economic system.
In the early days of the 20th century, the automobile industry is the most important industry in the world. The discipline inside plants tended to be vicious.
You did exactly what the boss told you.
The speed up had to stop. The safety of each of us was threatened.
Kind of glorified gold-plated sweatshop.
If they caught you wearing your union button, you were fired and frequently beat up.
Just because they pay a worker, they don't own him.
And machine after machine were shut down.
We're on strike. It's a sit-down.
Everybody locked the gates, welded the gates.
And they shot tear gas into the plant.
There were a lot of thugs to hurt union people then.
A double-barreled shotgun was fired through the front window.
You have to be willing to put your life on the line if you really believe in a cause.
The union gave the workers dignity.
We felt like we were people again.
What the labor movement had done is force employers to pay really good wages.
From life insurance to pensions to medical insurance, Detroit was the richest city in America.
This union has not interpreted its responsibilities narrowly. They should demand freedom now, here and now.
And then all of a sudden, all of these things began to erupt.
He knew he was dealing with the golden goose.
We would not accede to the unconscionable demands of a powerful union.
It gave Luther a lot of power.
There are no secrets. I am running away from nothing.
But Walter said, if I raise this question with Lyndon Johnson, I'm out of there.
Walter found himself somewhat isolated.
My father and Walter and Victor were just so convinced of the righteousness.
And I began shouting at the top of my voice.
He challenged them to participate in that union and to make a difference in terms of people's lives.
We have come together to join hands in a common struggle for justice and human dignity, and nothing will stop us.
October saw the birth of three important figures in labor history. Ross Rieder has the details.
These were born in October. Joe Hill in 1879, Eleanor Roosevelt in 1884, and John Reed, 1887, along with our great-great-grandparents, great-grandparents, and our grandparents. Joe Hill, among his other talents, was a great adapter of the Protestant and evangelical hymns into still more, some think, useful and usually humorous Union parodies. He wrote poetry of the same quality and uses. He was framed by the court system in Utah State for a murder he didn't commit, which he then used to further the cause of the IWW. Eleanor Roosevelt was married to Franklin Roosevelt, and in her own way, she was as great and good for our society and culture as her husband. In my book, in fact, probably a grade above her husband. John Reed, journalist and author, gets an A for growing up in Portland, having written some of the early works that tried to explain to Americans what was and wasn't going on in that new Russian experiment. It was a wasted effort as far as most of us were concerned. All three of these October-born were sincere as well as radical activists for society's improvement.
This has been Our View, the television voice of Washington's working families, brought to you by the proud members of the Washington Federation of State Employees. We remind you, when you accept a paycheck for your hard work, you don't give up your rights. Thank you for watching.